for me, local food was important because reconnecting rural and urban and reconnecting people's plates to the soil that the food was grown in can lead to better ecological outcomes, but it can also lead to better economic outcomes and maybe even societal outcomes when those connections are just more clear. You're more deeply tied to, the people producing your food. There's something deeply meaningful about that.
You're listening to Granted Goodness, the show where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today I will be coming to you from Concord, New Hampshire, where I'm talking to my guest, Charlie Cummings, who is the founder and CEO of Walden Mutual Bank, as well as the founder and former CEO of Walden Local Meat. And we talk about a bunch of different stuff. We talk about purpose and storytelling and impact and positivity and optimism and leadership and building a brand around values. We talk about banking and mutual banks and the financial system and incentives and impact and how the work that Charlie is doing at Walden Mutual is helping to enable anybody to have a positive and lasting impact on our food system here in the Granite State. I hope you enjoy this episode of Granted Goodness. Charlie Cummings, thank you and welcome to Granted Goodness.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Excited to chat with you.
I'm really excited to chat with you. When I first had the idea of this show, I say this for a lot of the guests, but I probably mean it more for you than any of the other ones. Your work is at the intersection of pretty much everything I find interesting, worthwhile, and valuable about, the world and particularly the area of people making the world a better place. I'm an account holder myself, our personal savings, which is a huge bank account, by the way, massive numbers in that account. And our, business, for my wife and I's small farm are both parked here. And there's nowhere else that I'd rather do it. It feels like a no-brainer to me. So I'm very excited to talk to you.
Hey, I'm flattered by that and sincerely appreciate your partnership and that deep bank account.
So we always like to start these. Can you tell me a little bit? You were gracious. You told me again off mic, but I'd like to hear again for the listeners. Share a little bit about your relationship with the Granite State. How did you end up here?
Yeah, my wife and I always had this feeling that we would end up here, and I had some history in the state, and it just happened sooner than we maybe thought it would. So my grandfather moved up here to Lincoln in maybe somewhere around early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And I didn't mention this to you. I got a scholarship to ski race up here in high school, so I spent some time up here in high school. And then my wife and I moved back to Boston area in 2013. And then up here, just sort of found an amazing little town that some friends had moved to, and right place at the right time. So we moved up here in 2019. But we'd also gotten married here back in 2011. I should probably know that. No, sorry, it's 2013 we got married.
Was that during a ski race? Is that how, like you were holding hands and then?
No, it wasn't that regionally inspired, but we got married up in a greenhouse in Plymouth.
Okay, that's pretty regionally inspired.
Yeah, I guess.
That's very cool. Man, there are so many. That I've actually never. There's a lot of cute wedding traditions out there. I've never heard of that one, and I'm a big fan of that.
It made sense. My wife at the time had started working on an organic vegetable farm.
Okay.
So she had previously been in the Boston Ballet and did office jobs since then, and really missed physical work.
Yeah.
and farming is a beautiful job in that respect because it's intellectually and physically challenging.
Right.
And so it was just a summer plan for her that, became a year and then 2 years, and now she's still doing it. So I guess getting married in a greenhouse sort of aligned nicely.
When did the two of you start to think that maybe New Hampshire was a place that you wanted to build a life?
I think, like I said, we had always thought we would end up here someday, like maybe in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But moving away from the city, I think, was pretty intimidating a few years ago, before we had kids.
Yeah.
And then once we had kids, we started to want a little more space, as I think a lot of people do, and wanted less traffic in our lives.
Sure.
And we were headed up here pretty often to go hiking. Some of my favorite hikes in the world are up around here. So we were just spending more and more time up here. And then, like I said, the right place at the right time just kind of happened to be available. And then it was sort of right before the pandemic. So our pandemic experience was very different than, people on the 128 loop around Boston experienced it.
Right, right. It's funny. I like that you have some history here with your grandfather. Sometimes I'll ask people that question, and they'll say, "Oh, my grandfather or my great grandfather," and I never know if they're going to say, when you said, "Oh, my grandfather moved here around 2004," it's either that or it's like my uncle was on the Mayflower, and there's no.
Yeah.
There's no
nothing in between, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean 2004 is a long time ago. Like it's a great route to have, but I swear to God, a guy I work with, even, he is related to Josiah Bartlett, and I think that's like as close to being the Prince of New Hampshire. Josiah Bartlett is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence or something, and he's like from New Hampshire.
Namesake in the West Wing too.
Yeah, that's right. See, I brought that up to him and he didn't. I said, "Did you know there's a very famous TV character, named after this character?" And he's like, proud of his history. And he's like, "I have no idea who that is. I'm not going to."
That's disappointing.
Yeah, he wouldn't like the West Wing. It's too optimistic.
Well, we're about to close on a loan to a local farm right here in Concord that is over 200 years in the same family. So
no kidding.
I guess there's now 6 generations living there.
Wow.
But 5th generation managing the farm. And that's pretty incredible. Like, the farm was founded before America.
Wow. That's not, what's the name of that family? Do you happen to know?
Potter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I might have covered that or a similar. There's some farm in the area, in the Concord area, that's like an ancestral family farm.
I'm pretty sure that's the one.
Yeah. I put
It was recently, they recently did a conservation easement, so there was news about it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, how cool is it? This is a very good plug for my Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, where we regularly round up positive. That was in the granite gardening section.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks for helping make that happen. It's a great story, and a relevant one, right? There is this interesting modern question that I think is at the core of a lot of your work, of what is the right balance or the desirable balance of, maintaining our traditions and our heritage around agriculture, food, community, etc., and, living in the modern world. A lot of people see those things as being at odds, and I think you have a really unique perspective on it. So
I appreciate that.
Maybe we could start a little bit. I mean, was Walden Meat the first place that you started thinking about all this stuff? Like, tell me a little of the story of your kind of career.
So I'll go way back. My parents got divorced when I was pretty young, and my mom basically stole my 3 sisters and I, told us on a Friday we were moving, and we left on Sunday.
Wow.
So I was born in Iowa and then grew up on Cape Cod.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this, somewhat traumatic journey out, but after that, very idyllic place to grow up as a kid on the Cape. And my a formative experience for me from a professional standpoint was there was a proposal to put a wind farm in Nantucket Sound in the early 2000s. This was the first proposed offshore wind farm in the country. Wow. And it immediately attracted some pretty fervent opposition from Walter Cronkite, the Kennedy family, and a number of other progressive families that live either on Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, or Cape Cod, because this thing was right in the middle of Nantucket Sound. But the visual impact of this thing was, if you're standing on the beach at the closest point to shore, hold your arm out less than a quarter inch on the horizon was what we were talking about.
Right.
And so I found what these people were saying to be pretty hard to stomach, which was effectively, we're for wind energy, but just not here, not in our backyard.
NIMBY, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I learned that acronym. And the alternative was a coal plant in someone else's backyard.
Right.
And so that really got me interested in the world of energy and this idea that when you don't think about the externalities associated with your choices, those become someone else's problems somewhere else.
Right.
And energy is this sort of out of sight, out of mind thing. You plug something into the wall and we don't think at all where those electrons are coming from. And this was a sort of right in your face proposal that made that dichotomy a little starker for me.
Yeah.
So I had helped to start and for the long time served on the board of an advocacy organization that was formed in favor of that project. And it was 8 or 10 years worth of work. And we successfully ended that process, I think, achieving meaningful changes in public opinion on the project. I think when we started, it was 2/3 against statewide. And by 8 years in, it was 3/4 for the project.
Right.
But we had this very well-funded opposition campaign. And even though the developer had a signed lease from the government, all state, local, and federal approvals, they couldn't raise the capital they needed because there was concern from a development risk perspective, given the well-funded opposition.
Right.
So their power purchase agreement at some point expired and they ran out of time, which was really disappointing, but nonetheless, a lot of really interesting learnings there for me. I spent some time in management consulting, which was a good sort of general business education. In college, I studied public policy and sort of had this view that business was a little icky. Like I just wasn't interested in business and was much more interested in policy and the public sector and nonprofits. And skiing, yeah, a little bit too on the side. I think I took that job, one, to pay back my student debt, and two, to just sort of see how the private sector could engage in some of these challenges. And then years later, I spent some time with a venture-backed composting company that was based, I spent a lot of time in California's Central Valley. It's the most agriculturally productive place in the planet. That little valley produces 80% of the world's almonds.
Wow.
40, 50, 60% of pretty much every cash crop you can name.
Yeah.
Raspberries, strawberries, tomatoes, lettuce, etc. And yet it's sort of teetering on the edge of failure if somebody turns the water off, which happens fairly regularly these days. It's also a weird place because it's all powered by migrant labor.
Right.
And there's nowhere to eat in the valley besides like Arby's and McDonald's.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking around that same issue that I saw in the energy world. When some of these towns, there's one town, I forget the name of the town, but south of Modesto somewhere, that was totally dominated by this egg laying facility. And you couldn't even walk outside on the sidewalk of this town without like getting a burning sensation in your eyes from the ammonia in the air.
Yeah.
And there's just very few places in New England where that would be tolerated.
Right.
And so to me, it turned out like that was a big realization that food had that same dynamic where the consequences of our food choices are often borne by someone else somewhere else.
Right.
And so that was really the basis of Walden Local. Yes, there's a case to be made for food miles and all of that, but
Right.
for me, local food was important because reconnecting rural and urban and reconnecting people's plates to the soil that the food was grown in, I think can lead to better ecological outcomes, but it can also lead to better economic outcomes and maybe even societal outcomes when those connections are just more clear and more you're more deeply tied to the people producing your food. There's something deeply meaningful about that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean that was the thing I saw on your website and kind of the description of who and why. I'm going to summarize it and probably badly, but you say something to the effect of, my wife and I, we were put off by factory farming. We were bothered by it like a lot of people. And, we would see the negative images of it and whatnot. But over time, that impact, it kind of fades away. Like it's, as you say, it's very out of sight, out of mind. And that for the two of you, you found it to be a much, I don't know, like your lifestyle didn't really change until you found a more positive kind of path toward discovering the things that you liked or disliked about, getting deeper in that world, I guess. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good plug for your podcast, right? Like,
well, you're here.
Negativity though, like doesn't change people's minds.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times you saw the picture put out there by PETA with
Right.
the veal calf in a cage that they can't turn around in, or a pregnant sow, same thing. It would stick in your mind for a bit, and a couple hours later, like you're ordering a cheeseburger.
Right.
And so what really I think can change behavior is when you have a deeply meaningful, positive experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's what changes minds and views,
Yeah. Or even this idea that, we should be orienting toward convenience and, time and, profit even all the time everywhere, right? And anything that detracts from that is is silly or not worthwhile. And I feel like that gets at, what you mentioned earlier of, there is this real disconnect that people feel between their food and where it comes from. And, it's a hard thing to kind of put into words. And I think sometimes people they can be very dismissive of it, right? Because there are all these narratives around, factory farming and modern agriculture and how efficient it is and how much food we produce. So you'll often hear people say, hey, we can't go back to. I mean, I'm not trying to romanticize the past, but it is a really interesting, complicated question of trying to tease out what were some things about how people used to live. Maybe some of that was people understood the food system better, or the average person understood how to tend a garden and maybe saw their neighbors more, right? Can we have that and have the benefits of modern technology, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But I'm with you in the sense that it really bugs me when people make a really sort of grand, dramatic statement like, we've got to feed 10 billion people and we can't do that with organic food or
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's ignoring the entire history of human progress. It's analogous to saying we can't power the world with renewable energy, which people were pretty firmly saying 10 years ago. But look at now, like the single largest growing sources of energy are solar and wind, and something like 80% of the net new capacity last year was solar. So yeah, it'll take a while to replace
Right.
the entire existing base, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah.
And the same can be said of technology improvements in yield that drive yield improvements on organic and regenerative farming methods. So I try to avoid those types of grand statements.
Right.
Like you didn't hear me say we can feed the world with organic food.
It's a very complicated question. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say I know what's right for this region
Right.
and what the highest and best use of available land is here. And that was sort of the basis for Walden Local. Is this is actually one of the most productive places on the planet to grow perennial pasture. And so it's a great place to grow ruminant animals that eat grass.
You're making me rethink my decision not to have cows on my small farm. They seem like a lot of work, but this is a silly personal example, but when someone framed it to me this way, like I've always, this is how out of touch, I am, right, as an average person. Maybe other people are less ignorant than me. I've always thought that dairy products were great. I love cheese. I love yogurt. Who doesn't? Plenty of people don't, but you know what I mean. And cows have always just kind of been out there. Like I didn't grow up on a farm, and I know somewhere in my head that cows make milk, milk makes cheese, etc. Right? And then a friend of mine who is a farmer, or more of I'm like a fake farmer. We're trying to start a farm, but a friend of mine who knows about cows and basically majored in like bovine studies and all that. She explained it to me. She said, "You don't understand. Cows are a miracle technology. They take grass and convert it into protein."
Mm-hmm.
And something about the way that she said it, I was just like, oh my God, does everyone know this? Does everyone else know about the cow? It was amazing.
Yeah, and there's sheep and goats, but beyond that, there's not other species that have a rumen that can do that. Yeah. It's magical.
This is actually, I want to talk to you, and you're the interesting person here to interview, but I would accept just like basic farming 101. Like if you could just explain to me the farm animals and EI, what's old Farmer McDonald and all that. That'd be an efficient use of our time.
Great. Let's do it.
So Charlie, when you say that your lifestyle didn't really change until you and your wife found the more positive story to tell around, the kind of lives that you were wanting to build, how did that feeling turn into Walden Local Meat?
So my wife had started working on this organic vegetable farm that had an integrated sheep operation. And it became clear, I met a bunch of other people in New England agriculture by virtue of her. And it became clear that these folks were producing products that were demonstrably better tasting, had better nutritional profiles, were better ecologically for the land, and better economically for the farmer. And yet it wasn't as if these people could plug into, Cisco or UNFI or these major broadline distributors. And we also knew that there was a lot of people like us that wanted access to these products. But we were often, had some sort of compromise in trying to get them. So whether that was the inconvenience of having to drive a while, or sometimes you're like looking in a dirty cooler of half defrosted stuff, and I don't mean to poo-poo the people bringing meat to a farmer's market, but it's it's like not the best buying experience all the time.
Yeah, I did that last year.
You bought it or sold it?
No, my friends, they have a beautiful homestead up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and well, they're neighbors with an Amish community up there, and they had a lot of beef, and so they said, we can get you half a cow, but you'll need to accept it in buckets and bags, which was I mean, you won't find a more ethically
Totally
raised animal. So I drove up there and brought home a bunch of beef, and it was like frozen in bags, and it's still in our freezer. Like, we have so much of it in our freezer at home, but
So we were doing the same things, but there's only so many people that want to buy 400 pounds of meat at a time.
That's a great experience for the customer per se.
Yeah, so it was as simple as, we're going to buy whole animals from area farms, distribute them in this share program that looks, very much akin to like a vegetable CSA.
Right.
And deliver them right to people's doors. And so, yeah, the company grew quite nicely over the next 8 years or so. And we vertically integrated backwards to own and operate a slaughter and processing plant, as well as a pick pack cold storage facility. Still do all of our own last mile delivery to about 40,000 individual families from Central Jersey to Portland, Maine.
Wow.
And and increasingly doing a variety of other products like cheeses and grass-fed butter and things like that.
So Jersey is kind of the limit. Like, is that you guys don't service outside of there?
We go as far south as like Central Jersey and as far north as Portland, Maine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then as far west as like Central Mass, I guess. Yeah.
When you started that company, did you have that vision that it would be kind of a regionally oriented enterprise, or did you kind of follow the growth, so to speak? Like, I don't know, tell me how it panned out versus how you thought it was going to go.
So I never intended it to be national. Local was always like a core part of the ethos.
Right.
And there was always a question around like, well, what does local really mean? And we tended to see, as I think a lot of people who live here tend to see, New England as sort of a local region. Yeah. And I guess, New York and New Jersey are tack-ons to that to some extent.
That's a very controversial. Depending on who you're talking to.
Yes.
I think
indeed.
they like to say that, but
there was always debates around like, is it okay to say that we're Red Sox fans in this if we're going to send these to the New Jersey people? And I think there's an element of you'll
find out what local means real quick.
Exactly. But there was an element of like just sort of being ourselves and being okay with that.
Right. Man. So if you could, and it's an exciting time to talk to you because, like there's this whole other enterprise that I want to get into, but seeing as how you're like Waldo Local Meat, very much is alive and thriving. But in terms of your involvement in it, you're kind of at the tail end, right? In that, more of your attention is now on Walden Mutual, you would say?
Yeah, so I stepped down as CEO in 21 and then served as board chair for another year or so, and am now off the board entirely, yeah.
What do you know now, or the day that you stepped down as CEO, if you could have spoken to yourself on day one of the whole thing, of the first time you thought, let's do this, what would you say? Like, if you could talk to Charlie through time and through the years? Or a better way of asking that question might be, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier? If there's anything. You might say I made no mistakes.
I made not one mistake.
I asked someone that once and they said, nothing. I wouldn't say anything.
I guess there's always a warning there of like, if you, I mean, even 5 years into it, if I knew what I did then at the beginning, would I have even started the thing in the first place? I think that might be my fear in answering that question, because this was always a sort of grinded out type of business. There was no miracle technology, or there was a little bit of business model innovation, but it was really just about optimizing assets in a really, again, sort of grinded out every day, learn lessons every day type of way.
Right.
I think one of the challenges in building any business is being mindful of who you're listening to and who you're not. And one of the dangerous things an entrepreneur can do is go around talking about an idea and saying, what do you think about this idea?
Sure.
And if you ask 10 people, what do they think about your new idea? Probably 8 or 9 of them will say, here's why that kind of won't work.
Yeah.
And that's not good data.
Right.
What presents you good data as an entrepreneur is when you go and sell a product and people buy that product and they pay you money for it.
Right.
So like if I asked you, would you buy this pen if it looked a little different? And you said yes. And I said, well, what if it were $5?
Right.
And you said yes. That is worse than no data at all.
Right.
Because your opinion or supposition around whether or not you would buy this pen, it should be irrelevant to me. So anyway, if my, 8 years in person could go back and tell the day one person, you definitely burn a lot of brain cells, kind of sort of trying to tease out a lot of different advice along the way. And some of it is incredibly valuable, and trying to find those people and dig deeper into where that experience is coming from and sort of filter out the noise. That's a really hard skill, and maybe a hard lesson learned over a long time.
Yeah. That's such a different way of answering that question than anyone I've ever asked it to. So thank you for that. And it reminds me, a lifetime ago when I was a professional beekeeper, like I was telling you about, I took this like entrepreneurship class or whatever, and one of our mentors, they said the same thing that you just said, right? And they called it the mom test, right? This idea that if you want honest feedback on whatever your thing is, your product or your business, you can't ask your mom, because she's going to think it's great no matter what.
Totally.
Right. And the point of the class was to like how to engineer honest and good information, data or feedback for your product. It's like, how do you test the idea of your thing without people being biased?
Oops, sorry.
No, this is very casual. This isn't like, we're not on C-SPAN right now. You can get up, use the bathroom. All right, take a break.
Let me give you one more thought so I don't lose it.
Sure.
I think another mistake in that business, sort of knowing that it was that sort of just day in, day out grind type of thing, is I tried to do everything myself for a really long time. And it was many, many years before we sort of had a real management team in place. And in so many ways that held the company back. And so that was an important lesson learned. Part of that is just like resources and capital availability, but part of it also is, I think especially in your first company, a lot of people are, very micromanagement oriented towards just trying to get every little detail to feel exactly right.
Yeah.
And so a bank is very different for all kinds of reasons, but I definitely have a different approach.
Charlie, Tell me, yeah. Tell me the story of how Walden Mutual came into being. And you can start wherever you want to start. Like I said, I'm a proud account holder, and when I saw that there was a bank in or oriented around New Hampshire that was starting, and that I could put my money there and know that they would use that to support, local, ethical, like really, really high quality, food and just any kind of operation on local ag in the New England region, I thought to myself, that's the coolest thing. Like, why would I want to put it in a Bank of America or wherever? Like, I don't know what they're doing. I'd much rather these people use it for this if it's just going to be where I park my money. So I know there's a lot more to it than that, but that's my exposure. I have one of the metal cards, the metal founding cards.
Founding partner, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that. I should pull it out right now. But that's how I learned about Walden Mutual and, kind of my first exposure to it. But give us a little more detail, because this is a real opportunity.
No, I think we should cut right there. And that's our advertisement. That was beautiful. Thank you.
I could do a way better one than that.
So it came from a couple different places. So one was at Walden Local, we were always in the position of lending to all of our partner farms. Mm-hmm. And I had struggled to find the right banking relationship for the company because it didn't seem like there were a lot of banks out there that understood the nature of, in our case, a subscription-based e-commerce business, but also one that owned livestock. And so it seemed like there was a need within this ecosystem for not necessarily a bank, but a financial enterprise of some kind that really intimately understood that ecosystem and could be a partner in a different way. So that was a part of it. Another part of it was Walden Local had raised a bond from our member families a few years prior. And we sold out we sold $1 million of this bond in about 2 weeks, mm-hmm. which we could have raised a lot more. We structured it in a particular way from a regulatory standpoint. And it was an important source of capital for the company, but it was also this amazing way of bringing these people sort of under the tent, so to speak, and allowing them to invest alongside us and deepen their relationship in a really interesting way. And it clearly tapped into something. And I think that in the impact investment world, we've gone through a few phases, right? So the first phase was, I want to screen out bad stuff from my investment portfolio and my retirement savings. Like, I don't want to invest in tobacco stocks or gambling or whatever. And then the second phase was this sort of ESG lens. So how do I sort of screen my portfolio in a deeper way and invest more in the things that seem to be doing good?
Right.
But when you carve away some of the facade there, actually a lot of the stuff was not all that meaningful, and the ESG funds out there kind of look the same as every other fund.
Right.
And the fact that, ExxonMobil has an independent director on their audit committee is great and important, but not exactly the impact that a lot of people are trying to have.
Yeah.
And so now there's this third phase, which is much more about attachment to place and how can I see the impact of my investment in a much deeper way and ideally a measurable way. And there's increasingly a blending of buckets, so to speak, especially amongst a younger generation, where the sort of conventional thing in a portfolio is like, I have my equity bucket, I have my debt bucket, and then I have my charitable bucket. Mm-hmm. And increasingly, those worlds are blending now in really interesting ways that creates a lot of opportunity. So anyway, those are the two sides of the bank balance sheet. Is one is a source of capital, and then the other is a use. And so, you might ask, well, why did you do as a bank?
Yeah.
And interestingly, we just had this conversation. That's what this whiteboard is.
I was going to say, the camera, maybe I should just flip the camera around. There's a very elaborate, many different boxes to enable anyone to positively and lasting.
Hold on.
The grammar is a little wonky, but the meaning is clear. To enable anyone to have positive and lasting change in our local food ecosystem.
That's it.
Yeah.
To enable anyone to make positive
Yeah,
and lasting
make.
change. That's
Right.
the missing piece. So, that's our mission, to enable anyone to make positive and lasting change in our local food ecosystem. So if that was your mission, you think about how the different ways you could achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And so one is, well, you could start a food company, and that's what Walden Local is.
Yeah.
But there are limitations there because, that's really a company about pasture-based meat. Not everybody eats meat.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a limited scope that it ultimately can take. It does have the benefit of having a very clear mission where you've got to explain the trade-off between making a profit and having an impact. But in that case, by and large, the company's growth and growth of profit is enhancing your impact. So that conflict is not always, those two things should not be in conflict with one another on a day-to-day basis. But another limitation of that is that there's a certain life cycle of particularly a private company where we were just talking about a fifth or sixth generation farm that's been around for 200 years. That's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Most businesses don't live to see their 10th birthday, let alone their 20th.
Right.
And even assuming the company will be around for a longer time, and it does have a great business model, there's a certain lack of permanence in a private ownership structure. And at some point, you either have to pass a business on to another generation, or there has to be an ownership transition of some kind.
Yeah.
And generally, those don't result in an enhancement of the mission.
Right.
So like Ben & Jerry's is the commonly used cautionary tale there of Unilever buys Ben & Jerry's with the hope that small company changes big, and that almost never happens. And even though Unilever is on the leading edge of all, significantly sized multinational companies as it relates to sustainability, Ben & Jerry's under that umbrella is a shadow of what it used to be from a social and political activism perspective, which was what the company was for originally. So I became really interested in what are more durable organizational forms. And certainly a nonprofit can meet that bar. You have an organizational structure that doesn't require that type of ownership transition. A nonprofit has the benefit of not having that profit mission conflict.
Right.
But nonprofits also have the challenge of having an ongoing source of capital. And so that can become a limiting factor from a scale or impact perspective.
Yeah.
You could also have done this as like an equity fund. So we're going to go out and raise a bunch of investor money and invest it in local food and farm businesses.
Yeah.
But farms have an even shorter duration. Like it's typical to say, well, this is a 7 to 10 year fund, and then you're done. And you could go out and raise another fund. But I guess, first of all, does the world need another equity fund is a question.
Depends who you ask.
Fair enough. But
No.
but that also felt very limiting because generally it's only the people who have the wherewithal to invest that have the opportunity to really participate in that.
Right.
It isn't clear that equity is the right vehicle for a lot of these small firms and businesses, because if they don't intend to sell their businesses, how does that equity holder get their money back?
Right.
And so that leaves us with the bank form that, again, the mission is to enable anyone to make this positive and lasting change. What is more anyone and everyone than a bank account?
Right.
So whether you have $5 or $500,000 in that bank account, you can participate in this because we're taking those dollars and then using them on the other side of the balance sheet to invest in the form of a loan to all of these underlying businesses. And what's really powerful about a bank is if you want to unlock growth and sort of further development of this ecosystem to create a more vibrant, sustainable local food ecosystem, a bank is the most powerful lever for change that I can think of to achieve that, because you can actually lower the cost of capital and make more capital available to that ecosystem. That's not something an equity fund can do.
Right.
And so, sorry, that was a very long-winded explanation of why we're a bank, but there were other organizational forms out there available to us that you could say would achieve the same mission. But gosh, a bank is like so incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
Because it serves both sides of the ecosystem. Like, it allows everyone to participate, and it lowers the effective cost of capital for everybody on the other side. And if you can invest with a lens towards sustainability and impact, you can really move the whole system forward in a way that is really, really powerful. Yeah. So that was why a bank was interesting to me.
Well, I mean, the way you explained it makes a lot of sense, like piece by piece. It reminds me of that great TED Talk by that Simon Sinek guy, where he's like, start with, don't decide, I want to be a bank. I want to start a bank. Let me find a justification for it. It's like, no. We want to enable any person to create positive and lasting change in the food system. Let's work outward from that goal. Okay, we ended up at starting a bank. That's the way to do it, right? I am curious, though. I mean, I've seen this in your materials, that it's the first new mutual bank in 50 years. When I hear that, it sounds like a big deal. Can you kind of explain that to me? Like, what is a mutual bank?
Yes.
Why have so few of them been started?
Yeah, so this is the lasting piece of that mission. So how do you create an organization that has real longevity? And there was a time at which I was contemplating going back and getting a PhD because I was so obsessed with this idea of like it was in organizational behavior around different governance structures and ownership models. So you have cooperatives, you have employee ownership structures, purpose-driven trusts, public companies, private companies, nonprofits, and now this newer form of benefit corporations. So there's all these, there's a lot of different variants of organizational structure that have different histories around how well they manage stakeholder interests. Mm-hmm. And I became really interested in that idea and uncovered this structure of a mutual bank, which is essentially a cooperative, very much akin to a credit union, where the ultimate owners of the bank are the depositors. And this has been around for 250 years. And in fact, in the early part of the 20th century, 80+% of deposits in this region of the country were held by mutual banks.
Wow.
And so they had this rich, incredible history of serving communities really well and also driving stability in the banking system that predates a lot of the modern banking regulatory structures.
Yeah.
Because these institutions didn't have incentives to take the kind of risks that stock banks do.
Yeah.
And for a number of reasons after 1970, they've sort of fallen out of favor, not the least of which is our new obsession with shareholder value above all else. But to me, it was this organizational form that was very much ripe for reinvention in the modern era, and a way of giving our mission real teeth from a governance perspective to say, no, we didn't set this up to sell it. We set this up to build like a really enduring institution to go after this mission for a long time, like long after I'm here or any of the current team are here. And that was really, really interesting to me. So no one had formed a new mutual bank for a long time because it wasn't clear how you could comply with the modern capital requirements when a mutual bank doesn't technically have stockholders in the same way that a stock bank does. So that was the crux of us getting the charter across the finish line.
Well, it's a great example of, challenging the status quo. I mean, there's all these layers to it. Even the idea, I think, of saying, hey, we're going to start a bank and we're going to orient it around the, needs of the food system in this area, and we're going to try and scale, people doing this work in the way that we think is better for everybody, and stakeholders, whoever that may be included. But to also kind of like to make that happen, to also have to challenge, the idea that this isn't maybe correct entirely to say that like this possibility has almost been regulated out of existence because, the capital requirements or whatnot, like the financial, lifeblood and systems of our country and whatever they're not used to people thinking about banking in this way, perhaps. And so, that apparently no one has thought to structure a bank this way in 50 years.
Okay, so part of where that comes from, and this is going to go deeper than you want, so cut me off when you want. Okay, so
go deep down.
In the early 1970s, Milton Friedman, the economist, basically invented the construct of shareholder value. So before that, public companies were run with the idea that the managers were supposed to balance the interests of all the stakeholders of the company. The stockholders, yes, but also the employees, the communities that they served, the customers, the vendors. And that's a challenging task. But this is why we formed business schools, and also in the early part of the 20th century, to educate a group of administrators that were supposed to specifically not serve the narrow interests of capital or labor, but instead serve the overall interests of the company or corporation itself.
Right.
That remains a founding part of the ethos of all of the countries, like graduate schools of business that were formed in the earliest 20th century. And there's a lot of really interesting research out there on like the birth of management as a profession, and why management took a different path and hasn't truly become a profession in the same way that a doctor or an attorney we consider to be a profession in a different way. And without delving too far down that rabbit hole, our conception of management from 1900 to 1970 was that view of this is an administrator that is supposed to serve all of the interests, all of the stakeholders, but ultimately the long-term interests of the company itself. And that is a complex balancing act. And Milton Friedman came in and said, no, that's kind of wrong. And the management team are agents of the principals here, and the principals are the shareholders, and the shareholders alone.
Right.
And so that's the whole birth of the principal agent theory, and out of that came the primacy of shareholder value above all else. And so ever since then, that has captivated public markets and public company executives to say, shareholders come first, and that is our job, to maximize shareholder value. And because we measure earnings quarterly, that means maximizing quarterly earnings per share above all else.
Right.
And the problem with that is it ignores all the other stakeholder interests of the company and often leads to a lot of externalities, negative externalities, where you have companies that will end up essentially privatizing profits and while leaving the public with the those negative externalities, those costs.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the reason I say all that is shareholder value is this construct that is not unlike business casual. It's a societal thing that we just made up. And now it's become so deeply entrenched in our culture, particularly American culture, because it doesn't exist in the same way elsewhere. It's taken as like a law of thermodynamics, and it's not. Yeah. It's just something we made up. And so the mutual structure is directly counter to that impulse and meant to achieve a different balance from a governance perspective. So sorry, that was much more than you were looking for.
It's not. That's exactly what I'm looking for. There's so much to like about that and everything you just said. And I'm sure this has occurred to you and your team a lot, but I feel like there's a lot of beautiful metaphors between thinking about the business landscape and the structure of your business. And, like we're used to, or at least a lot of people I feel like are used to, they hear things like banking and capital and profit loss or whatever. And to them, it means something cold and inhuman. And it's the antithesis of so many things that are warm-blooded and human-oriented, right? And I feel like, we forget, as you just so eloquently pointed out, that, money is just a construct, I mean, it matters. Like sometimes people say that and they're like, money's not real, man. But, it's a tool to facilitate commerce and valuable relationships across society, right? Like it's a really good idea. Bartering is cool, but like money is very helpful, and I say that as someone who did once trade not a cow, but, some cow meat for some stuff. But I don't know, this relationship between, this kind of like holistic, more inclusive, a wider view of who counts as our stakeholders or which stakeholders are we valuing or paying attention to. It feels like a natural complement to the way that a lot of people your work supports think about farming and agriculture, right? To say, we didn't always do it this way. People didn't always, we were talking about bees earlier. We don't have to talk about bees, but, people didn't always, for example, try and monoculture 1,000 acres of a thing and, get a bunch of machines to do it. Not that mechanized agriculture is inherently bad or anything, but you know what I mean? Like there is a lot to learn from traditions of the past. And I don't know, I really like how you're incorporating all these different things.
Yeah. So we joke about how what's old is new again, and like really lean into that. And, you were talking earlier, there's a safe here, and no, in fact, your $200 is not just sitting in that safe.
I kind of wish it was, though.
But the reason that's only half a joke is because we've really gotten away from that in the past few decades. And this is where I start to sound like Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life. But when you put your dollars in a bank, they don't just sit in the safe. They go out and get lent in the community. And that is the role of banks in our society, is to get to decide who that goes to. And it's lent out over and over and over again. So you put in your $200 and we write a $200 loan to someone, and then they pay back $10 the next month, and that $10 goes out again. So your money gets sort of multiplied in that way. And it turns out the 3 largest banks in this country are also the 3 largest funders of fossil fuel development around the world. And so when you have the opportunity to place your deposits somewhere that is trying to achieve a real lasting impact in this ecosystem, I think that's really differentiated. And I think there's a good portion of people that want to align a lot of aspects of their lives with a set of values and impacts they want to see in the world. And so full circle back to, my experience in California's Central Valley with food, and my experience before that with this offshore wind farm off the coast of Cape Cod. It turns out finance, it has that same dynamic where if you're not thinking about what happens to that money, it's someone else's problem somewhere else.
Right.
But actually in a much more profound way than those other 2 sectors, because it's an enabler of everything else.
Yeah.
And banks are sort of at the center of our economic system for that reason, as allocators of where that capital goes. And so that was a really interesting opportunity to build that potential path for people that want their deposit dollars to do something a little bit different.
I mean, I speak for myself, but definitely, I mean, you must run into a bunch of people, maybe even more young people, who, like, once they understand who you are and what you're doing, it's like, oh, are you kidding? Why wouldn't I put my money there? That's how it was for me. But I mean, even like, I think a lot of these concepts that, fundamentally are good ideas, that exist for, like, fractional reserve banking, for example, of like, hey, we can take your $200 and stretch it in all these different ways to give opportunities to a bunch of other people to do, more commerce and build things and do great stuff, right? I think a lot of people are so used to, they hear things like that, and the baggage that comes to mind, particularly, because of, like, their 2008 recession and all that, is anytime they hear the word bank, leverage, anything like that, their mind goes to this very cynical place of, oh, there it is. Yeah, baggage is there on the board. Right. No, it is of I think it's hard for people to untangle that idea from, what they're used to, which is, they only ever hear about, fractional reserve banking when it's, a bank that's overextended itself into a bunch of, inappropriately risky loans or, financial arrangements that just will topple like a house of cards and then, cause a bunch of problems for people's lives or whatever. And, like, I feel like people have just been exposed to so much of that I don't know. I mean, do you find that, like, when is explaining your bank to people like a balm to their
no
to their cynicism of the financial system?
No, but there is some baggage to get over there. So
balm being BALM, not BO.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Maybe. Yes. So yes is the answer. That was the other. I joked that, like, does the world really need another equity fund?
Right.
And I think the answer to that is no, but maybe. But does the world need a better bank? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like, I look at some of the behaviors of some of the big banks historically, like this term overdraft protection, for example.
Yeah. Like,
this is something that was kind of made up by the industry that doesn't really serve consumers well. And so there's a number of things like that I think individuals have felt burned by historically. And we're also kind of inspirations for, why a bank is an interesting structure to do this in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not asking you to speak for, every would-be change agent for the financial system, but there is really a lot of, I'm speaking as, someone who's 29 and can speak a little bit to the attitudes of my colleagues and people younger than me. I feel like there is a lot of, cynicism, distrust, certainly lack of education or awareness of, what is the financial system? What is it for? What does it do for people? What are some things that are good about it? What are some things that are not so good about it? And my sense would be that most people are definitely not used to hearing about an institution like Walden Mutual, and what I think is beautiful about that is, as you've pointed out in like case after case, there's nothing, this is the fun of the optimism stuff, right? There's nothing written in the sky. Like if we look out the window, it's not like, the universe creator, whoever took a big black magic marker and wrote in the sky, you can't have an ethically structured, reliable bank. It's not there, right? Like it's just, you won't find that rule written anywhere, Maybe you'll find, you could have a whole discussion about rules and regulations and laws and circumstances where they help or hinder like the betterment of the world and whatnot. But you know what I mean? Like, I love your enterprise because it's so much a great example of, enterprise and thinking creatively outside the box. How can we just build a better system? Like, we're dead serious about enabling anyone to create positive, lasting change in our local food ecosystem. What's the best vehicle for that, And that in a way is, it's a great entrepreneurial story. I love having entrepreneurs on here. I feel like entrepreneurs are naturally optimistic people. I mean, you kind of have to be an optimist to be an entrepreneur, right? I mean, almost as you said earlier, I was asking you, what do you wish you knew earlier, having done Walden Local Meat, and you, what I took your answer to basically mean was, if I knew how much trouble it would have been, I don't know that I would have done it, and it's good that I didn't know, because I had to believe and try, and then like that's part of the journey and all that. So I don't know.
Interestingly, this may blow up your podcast, but I'm not a particularly optimistic person.
That's fine.
I'm my wife would describe me as a glass half empty type of person.
How much water's left in your cup?
Almost none. So in the sense that like, and I think other entrepreneurs I've met would describe themselves that way, in the sense of like, just really obsessed with the next problem to solve, mm-hmm. and don't take a moment to like celebrate a success. 'Cause to me, that's what a young company is just a series of problems and decisions around how to solve those problems. And if you're not acknowledging what the biggest problem is at any given time, like that can be really, really dangerous. And so I spend a lot of time trying to think about what the single largest next problem is, and articulate it and communicate it and get alignment on it. And sometimes that can be exhausting and come across as negative, because you're not focused on having a parade around like what happened last month and how we're, doing what we said we would do. Yeah.
But you're just focused on the thing, the next thing.
Yeah.
Building it, making it better. It's interesting. You probably have some good fun facts about this, but I played drums, and so I know a little trivia about like drum companies and the businesses that supply parts and equipment for drum sets. I believe that the world's like biggest and best cymbal maker, Zildjian, which if you ever seen a drum cymbal, it probably says Zildjian on it. I think that they're one of the oldest continually running businesses, like in the history of the world, maybe. I swear to God, it's like a family of Turkish cymbal makers, started in like 1630 or something, somewhere in Turkey, and it's still privately held, and it's just like a family enterprise,
Amazing. I didn't know that, but I like stories like that. part of the inspiration for the capital structure that the bank took was the Dutch perpetual bond, which is the oldest known continuous operating financial instrument in human history. And I think it's 400 or 500 years old. And is that right? No, it can't be that old because it's at some point it was sold to Yale University, and the Dutch government is still making payments on this bond.
Wow.
So maybe it's 200 years old. I
so
want to
this
say
is-
it was 1600s though.
This is a literal, I thought you meant like the structure of this particular bond product is what's sold. You're saying the actual,
It's been paying interest for, I think it's 400 years. I think it might be 400 years. I'll look it
what
up.
like is it? Like what did the bond,
It financed
paid
a
for
bunch
what?
of dams or something like that. And it's been paying interest ever since.
I wonder if one of the dams that it financed, there's that infamous picture of the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dam. Makes you
Maybe.
wonder if that was
Maybe.
one of the ones.
1624.
That sounds very old. That's like Jamestown Colony.
Yep. So and then there was another one issued in 1648 that is currently in the possession of Yale University. So still paying interest.
I wonder if that's kind of a cool thing, because like you think of these corporate or commercial entities that have been around forever, and I don't know whatever happened to like the Dutch East India Company or whatever, but I feel like they were like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the pirate movies and they're always doing evil stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they made a lot of people a lot of money and a lot of tea, and probably were very active in the slave trade, I imagine. And so I don't know if they're still around.
Or it's like, oh, you've heard of CVS? Yeah, that's
Right.
them.
Exactly. It's actually the Dutch East India. They rebranded 7 times. Yeah.
I mean, there is definitely some derivative of them still around, I'm sure.
Wow.
I have no idea what it is.
They're next door to this building. You wouldn't know it. Man. All right. So tell me a little bit about, I love your vision, right? To enable anyone to enable positive and lasting change in the food system. Give me a little more specific though. Like, what does the future of Walden Mutual look like for you? Beyond, again, we're not thinking of quarterly earnings or whatnot, but where in your wildest fantasy, where do you imagine, this looking like in 10 years, 50 years? I mean, it's a long-term thing, so.
Yeah. Interestingly, I try not to think that way because I'm just always want our team to be focused on building piece by piece. And
Right.
so, yes, there's the
Lego tower.
That's right.
The Lego building.
That's right. We built a little Lego.
Is that why
tower.
you did that? Because it's like
No, I didn't extend that metaphor at the time, but I should have.
Yeah.
So we, there still is like obviously a very big long-term ambition for the place. So it's not that I want it to be limited in that way,
Right.
but, we didn't set out to quote unquote change the world. We set out to solve a problem in this particular region of the world and create a model that was aligned in every possible way around that intended impact. And so what does success look like in 10 or 20 years? I think it's meaningful progress against that mission. Have we developed a model that allows a greater and greater number of people to participate within it, and also a more sustainable, vibrant, inclusive food ecosystem? And that could take a number of different forms.
Right.
But I don't think, if it wasn't clear already, I don't think we're intending to build like a multinational conglomerate.
The McDonald's of
Exactly.
ethical mutual banks. Yeah.
Exactly. But that doesn't, I say that with a grain of salt too, because I don't mean to suggest we don't have big ambitions.
Right.
It's just you got to build one piece at a time, and like so we are 100% focused on that mission. And in 10 years' time, it could take a different form. And we're talking about, maybe we introduce a consumer credit card that has some interesting characteristics to reinforce this mission. Maybe we deepen our relationship with an adjacent region and, have a satellite there. But so that could take many, many different forms. But I hesitate to give you a solid answer to that question because I'm sort of an incrementalist in that way.
I'm not trying to nail you down on anything. It's just it's you clearly are someone who is very intentional, about the direction and the path you take and why. And I'd be upset if I didn't ask it, but I really like how you answered it, particularly because I can tell you right now, if you ever introduced a credit card, I would blow up your bank.
Great.
Because it's hard enough, they cleverly design, these point systems and the ease of payment to, seamless transaction, and this idea of I'm earning points the more money I spend, right? If I can know that me buying something with my Walden Bank credit card, which to be clear does not exist yet, or may not ever exist. This is nothing. Then you're going to log in one day and be like, who put $1 billion of cheese? We can't possibly, this destroyed the bank.
Great.
So,
all right. I'm going to write that down because that's a good reason to do it. But look, we have a debit card now.
Yes.
Right. And we have the beginnings of our variant of what you're describing. Forget the points.
Right.
We started this partner perks thing that we just have barely dipped a toe in the water on, but it's meant to be, how do you use a debit card structure to reinforce this ecosystem? Well, you get a 10% cash back at borrower businesses. What better way to deepen relationships across this? And so we'll lean into that a little more over the course of the next year or so. But I think that's the beginnings of a really interesting way to reinforce the ecosystem.
Yeah, that actually touched on one of my favorite parts of your business that I want to ask about. It's one of the favorite parts of my week or month, however often you send them out, when I get the partner stories email. Walden does this really cool thing. They'll highlight the stories of people who do business or are getting help from the bank. And so every so often I just get to open my email, which sounds like a very impersonal way to appreciate this very human oriented thing. But it is, I love reading about all the stories, of clearly people are grateful and appreciative and, are happy about the opportunities that the bank gives them. But, even as someone who is, just a deposit account holder, I love seeing that. So I don't know, are there any favorite stories that you have, or particular, times when you've met people or, gone into business with them and they've said, man, this is great. No, I've never encountered a bank who understands our needs like this. This is going to let us, grow and scale in the way that we've always wanted to. Tell me about that.
Every day, that's my favorite part of the job, is meeting an entrepreneur or an operator, and really trying to understand their business and be as helpful as we can, even outside of a loan relationship. So we often find ourselves, introducing people to investors and advisors and customers and vendors and just a bunch of other people that could be helpful to them. But yeah, I also, because I'm not really a banker,
right,
I'm more of an operator, I can speak to people sort of on the same side of the table, understanding what it's like to, plan around making payroll and how close to the sun you sometimes fly. Right. And I really understand that dynamic. Some of my favorite stories, though, I've got two for you. So we're starting to align around this idea of practice areas because we're focused in this particular couple of sectors. And some interesting things have emerged from that. So one is we developed a point of view on the local grain economy and tried to deepen our relationships with all the people that knew about growing, processing, distributing, just doing interesting things with grain in the region. Maine Grains, one of our bars.
I bulk order my oats from them.
There you go.
There's a 50-pound bag of oats in my basement right now.
Okay. So we, after a lot of work there, we ended up making a loan to an entity at every stage of that value chain, from growers of grain to a flour producer, to a malt house, a couple different breweries, and then even a cracker manufacturer that upcycles spent brewers' grains called Brewers Crackers. And it just became this really interesting set of relationships because there was mutually beneficial things we could do to everybody across that entire chain. And so there's so many opportunities to replicate that writ large in a whole different set of sort of sub-sectors. But I just loved seeing that come together because we're working with the entirety of the value chain. Another one which was totally unexpected was we have sort of inadvertently developed a little practice area around small town general stores.
Really?
So this is a dying breed, right? Like there's a lot of small towns that have lost their store, which was often the community center. It's often where the post office is. Up here in the wintertime in a snowstorm, it's sometimes the community's only resource for food and water. And we all know of, how there's been a long-term decline there for a variety of reasons for a couple of decades now. But a lot of them are now going through a generational transition where the people who have run the business for 50 years or started the business or what have you are retiring and selling. And so there's all these amazing young people that are buying these stores and reinvigorating them and bringing in local produce and have a different vision for what they want it to be, combined with the nostalgia of what they remember it being when they were little kids.
Yeah.
And, we've done 3 or 4 of these, and from our own underwriting are developing a point of view on, well, what's required to make this work from a visitor count, a basket sizes, like what are the metrics that matter to make these little stores pencil. But from the borrower's perspective, that's the deeper we can go into that, the more helpful we can be to them in sort of just being able to provide counsel for what we see in other places, because they don't compete with one another. They're hundreds of miles away from each other. It's sort of a bunch of Davids against a couple of Goliaths, or many Davids against a couple of Goliaths. So they have an attitude of like wanting to learn together. And so there's so much opportunity to put those people together and have some shared learnings, but it makes us a better lender to like go deeper and deeper into the space. And I can't think of anything more impactful from a depositor's perspective of like reinvigorating these small town general stores that serve these really interesting, vital roles in all of these communities.
Well, I imagine too that there's all kinds of, like second and third order effects downstream from that, right? Of like, say we get the general store back online, that brings, more foot traffic to the downtown area, and then, someone can do a cafe, and it's just like boom, 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 boom. I love how you think of all these things as, you know, a living ecosystem. Again, not so different from gardening, right? I feel like running a depositor bank is not the way that you think about it. It really feels analogous to farming and gardening, you know, tending an ecosystem.
It is. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I have not really thought about it that way, but yeah, that's
Are you
very
kidding?
accurate. Well, I
How
use
is
the
that-
word
how is
ecosystem
that
a lot,
possible?
but I don't compare it to a home garden. But yeah. That's, I guess
You're like
that's,
the ultimate gardener.
yeah, I guess that's maybe true.
Yeah.
Like I use a lot of harvest analogies,
Yeah.
so maybe it just is subconscious.
You definitely have. Yeah, you're gardening capital, people. You're literally gardening farms in a way, but in like a really, really cool, integrative way. Man. All right, Charlie, I could talk to you forever, but I want to be respectful of your time. We've been talking for an hour and 25 minutes, which tends to be close to the upper limit of how much my mom will listen to an episode of this show. So I always like to ask people, you know, you said that you weren't a particularly optimistic person, which is actually good. Like we need everybody. We don't just need the pie in the sky people, and I'm a pie in the sky person. But if you could tell me a little bit, what makes you, I mean, you're here doing it, so, you know, you believe there's a path forward. You know what I'm going to ask. What makes you optimistic about the future of your work?
Let me revise my previous statement. It's not quite so much that I'm not an optimistic
No, I
person.
know that.
It's that, in fact, maybe it's the opposite, is like, there's no doubt in my mind that the enterprise will work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm obviously deeply optimistic in
Right.
that sense. It's just what is expressed outwardly is like,
I see.
here's our next problem.
Yeah, people
Here's our
take
next
it.
challenge.
Yeah.
And so I'm always looking at the glass half empty, if you will.
I
But
prefer your breed of optimists, the ones who are like, let's just get some SHIT done.
so it's a realist.
It's a realist, yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well, the results take work and focus. Like, come on.
So what am I optimistic about?
Yeah.
You know, I think that it's hard not to be optimistic around the next generation of people who are thinking really differently about their lives and their impact on their communities and the world around them in a deeper way than the prior generation. So I remember the ethos when I went to graduate school being learn, earn, and return. And this very structured, that literally means go and learn from other people, learn a trade, make as much money as you can, and then, you know, spend a nice retirement giving that money back.
Right.
That does not strike me as the way the sort of younger generation now is thinking about their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And that model has not really served families very well. And it sort of implies that you sort of like work all the way up until this point, and then you get to shut it off and
Yeah.
sit on a beach and give your money away. And whether it's because of the pandemic or because of the financial crisis, combination of the two, or a somehow more enlightened view of the world, I'm inspired by young people who are thinking about their lives in a much more integrated way that sort of rejects that binary dichotomy of like, you've got to grind it out to pay the mortgage until you can retire, and then you get to enjoy a pina colada on the beach at some point. And now I see people who are like, you know, I've saved just enough money to take a year to go experiment in this other country and like develop my skills as a sculptor.
Right.
Or I'm, instead of taking a full-time job, I'm going to do these 3 side gigs, which are enough to get me from A to B, but it allows me to like really invest in this passion.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that passion project like becomes a business that you can make money from. And so it's just a much more fluid way of thinking about a life and a career that I think will serve individuals, families, and communities really well, and strikes me as a really interesting reply to the sort of bowling alone Robert Putnam critique. Right. I'm sure you've encountered that and that was sort of the ethos of the 90s and early 2000s, is like we had this traditional view of the family and our relationships with our communities and religion and society that had gone away by that point, but it wasn't replaced with anything.
Yeah.
And now I think it's getting replaced with, I don't have a name for it, but it's that more like integrated ethos of like, I want to spend my life in meaningful ways and develop meaningful relationships and spread positivity in the world.
Right.
And I just think that's really inspiring.
Drink the pina coladas now.
That's it.
That's what it's called.
That's it.
Something different. That's it. Well, I mean, intergenerational living even is like kind of making a comeback, you know, like that's even something that we talk about often on a personal level. Anyway, that's a whole other show. Man, well, Charlie, it has been so fun to talk to you. You can learn more about Walden Mutual, maybe plug Walden Mutual a little bit.
Yeah, no, sincerely appreciate it, Andy. It's been fun. And anyone can open an account on our website at waldenmutual.com. And I will talk to operators and entrepreneurs every day of the week. If you want to talk about your business and how we might be able to be helpful, feel free to shoot me a note anytime.
And anyone can have a positive, lasting change in our local food ecosystem. Thanks to Walden Mutual. Thank you very much, Charlie.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.